Hello, Budri Gamaru, and welcome to Gadigal Lands here in Sydney. Welcome to everyone up in Meanjin in Brisbane and further afield in Queensland. I'm Simon Thompson, editor of StartupDaily.net and the host of the Startup Daily Show. Great to have you join us for the latest in our monthly masterclass series, How to Start Up. Each month, we look at a key issue facing startup founders with an expert or two who will offer their advice on how to tackle those tricky questions. Each session runs for around 50 minutes and you'll have time to ask questions at the end. You'll find a chat box on the screen as you watch. Just ask what you want to know and we'll put those questions to our expert panel. Today's masterclass is titled Grabbing Global Success. We all know as founders, you're told to go big, go global. Well, a big thank you to today's presenting partner, Trade and Investment Queensland. Applications are now open for their Go Global Export program, which is helping Queensland-based export-ready businesses with funding and support to launch in a new international market. This is your chance with the government to help back you. Go to the link in the chat box for more. Applications are closing on September 11, so do get cracking. Great opportunity to boost your chances. Well, today I have two amazing guests joining me. A big welcome to Claire Bull, the head of ecosystem at the Sydney-Singapore venture development company, Rainmaking APAC. She's here in Sydney with me. Claire is an international trade and startup ecosystem builder working in markets such as Singapore, Japan, Korea, and the UK. When we were putting together this panel, she was the first person that came to mind. Such a great expert with great experience she'll share with you today. She knows those questions startup founders ask. We're going to try and answer them. Well, up in Queensland, in Meanjin, we also have Dr. James Fielding, the founder of Brisbane-based global health tech company Audira Limited, a global leader in innovative listening solutions for people with hearing challenges. Audira went from launch to ASX listing in 2021 in just 4 years. It is another extraordinary startup success story. Today, we're going to cover key areas of grabbing global success, what to consider when doing your research about entering a new market. We're also going to dig down into how to choose the right timing for the right place and who to get help from when entering a new international market, from government funding to other kinds of financial support. You don't have to do it all yourself. As I mentioned earlier, let us know if you have any questions. We'll get through as many as possible in this session. Feel free to tell us your name and your business as well. It'd be nice to give you a shout out. Well, welcome to the pair of you. Claire here in Sydney, Dr. James Fielding up in Brisbane. Great to have you and your expertise. I'm going to get cracking on this because we do have a lot to get through. Why go global is where I want to start. And should it be market-driven and customer-driven? Is it sort of everyone in the US ringing up saying, I love your product, please can I have it? Why go global, Claire?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, I guess, two reasons you'd go global. Either you're pushing yourself into the market because you think there's opportunities, or the best way, which is being pulled in by the market. So exactly as you say, you might have an Aussie startup and you're starting to get inquiries from overseas in a new market. Being pulled towards that market by those inquiries is the best way to go. An example of that would be there's an Aussie startup, Flow, that's in the StartMate Accelerator at the moment, and her solution is for school teachers. She's created a marking solution to help school teachers mark reports. Now, she's put out that on the digital platform, and she found, even though she was targeting teachers in Australia, that she had huge sign-up rates from teachers in Florida, in the US. And so she's immediately thought, okay, the US is an opportunity for me. And it's situations like that where you're pulled into a market by your customer base, which is a great reason to expand. And there might be a problem that you can solve in another market that pulls you towards that. And that's always the best way to go, rather than pushing your idea on a market that may not be ready for you.
James Fielding, 25 million, 26 million people here in Australia. There's capacity around the market for your products at Audira, which I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, just so people who haven't heard your story understand it a bit better. But tell us about your thinking about looking offshore.
Where we transitioned with regards to where we're going is very much to Claire's point of push first pull. So our technology is based on personalized sound. We have a personalized sound algorithm that tailors the sound to the need of each individual. And when we first started, it was a Kickstarter campaign, which is immediately global. So our first shipment was to 60 countries. And from there, we then secured the government funding here in Australia and really focused on Australia in the audiology sector. So where people are trying to buy hearing aids. And to Claire's point previously, our global expansion is focused on working with the international chains that are stocking our product here in Australia. And they might have 300 or 400 points of sale here, and they've got 5,000 or 6,000 internationally. And so we're very much in that stage now, where originally we pushed, hey, here's my bright idea. I'm sure people are going to love it. Let's go get it. And then after a few years of maturing, have realized that our best bet is going international, being pulled with the strength of these international players that we already had the great relationship with in Australia. And now they are taking us international with them because we're solving the same problem for them here in Australia that we will be internationally. It's a great product fit with known entities, and it lets us control our resources and get the best outcome.
James, Claire was just telling that story of Flow and suddenly finding a whole bunch of customers in the US. In terms of your initial funding campaign, was that how you managed to gauge that international demand for the product? Or what you were just talking about, how, you know, there was a couple of steps you went down, but was this a way to test the waters?
Absolutely. We had a really clever idea, and where programs like Kickstarter come to the fore is testing market demand without having to go through the steps of hardware development. So we followed that route, and the consequence was getting those first 3,000 or 4,000 initial customers. We ended up making $500,000 in the first 30 days of our Kickstarter campaign, and then the work begins. So it was very much asking people, hey, do you think this is cool? We had some really talented marketing teams and designers that were able to give people a real sense of what we were trying to accomplish. And then the funding came in to let us go and actually bring that to reality. So step one for us was, do people care? And using a platform like Kickstarter, it becomes an international conversation.
Tell me, is that international step the right one for every business from the outset? We know when you sit down with investors, they sort of ask about your total addressable market, you know, how big's your TAM, how big can you get? They want to get a feel for the ambitions of the business. And we know that the Australian market is small. Is it part of that initial step for every business to sort of step out into the big wide world?
I think saying anything is right for every business is always going to land you in a lot of trouble. I think that it should be on a case by case. There are some businesses for which the Australian market doesn't hold enough scale. Certainly for us, using the government funding models that we have here and the health model that we have here, Australia is an incredible base. So with that value of hindsight, should we have settled in and won home first before him to go take the plan international? Maybe. But that Kickstarter very much was is anyone interested? Let's see where the demand falls type approach. But once we settled back into our B2B approach we have now, it's very much been when we're ready, we'll go.
Claire, I want to ask you about this because in recent years with many founders, we've seen international capital coming into those businesses. Some of it is strategic investment because they are looking to expand overseas and they bring alongside the money to the cap table the experience that enables them to sort of scale offshore. Is it a good idea to look overseas for investment, not just because the US dollar is strong, for other reasons?
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. And particularly in businesses from Australia, we know it's tough to get investment in the market at the moment. I think that in Southeast Asia, and I was just there last week, there's certainly opportunities for businesses to get investors in Southeast Asia, and it's more than just the money. So one of the things that they bring is their networks and connections and introductions. So even taking VC money in Southeast Asia can be a really strategic investor because they're able to introduce you to their network and the right set of partners that you might need to enter into that market. Obviously, the capital markets in the UK and US are much, much larger than Australia and more opportunity, and it does actually help you just get a foot in the door in that market. So I would say for Aussie businesses, it wouldn't be the first investment I'd be looking for. It's when you're talking about when you're ready, and you'll probably say post Series A in Australia, it is a great idea to look overseas and see if there's opportunities from a strategic investor there, because that will accelerate your network and connections and just de-risk your entry into that new market.
James just mentioned it, and we'll talk to him about it in just a second. But as we said at the top of this, our presenting partner today is Trade and Investment Queensland. They've got their Go Global Export program. Is that one of those areas that founders should start looking around and sort of seeing what support is there closer to home?
Absolutely, and I have this concept I call triple dipping for Australian founders. So we're really lucky in Australia. So for example, if I was a Queensland business and I was going into the UK, I can get funding and grants from Trade and Investment Queensland, just like the Go Global program. I could speak to Austrade, who can help me with looking at the market, with visas, introductions in country, and then I could go over to the UK government side and speak to the Department of Business and Trade about what they can do to help make introductions in market. So there's actually 3 separate government departments that Australian founders are able to contact in any market they're going into and around the world. So we're actually quite lucky here in Australia from that perspective.
Triple dipping is a great concept. I think we need to trademark that one.
I agree.
James, tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of turning around. I mean, I think about these trade commissions. They often have people on the ground who understand those local markets, who can also, beyond financial support, offer you that intelligence.
Yeah. And I think by way of our most recent example, our last round of strategic capital came from Taiwan. And now we're in partnership with the leading audiology retailer in Taiwan and building products specifically for that market. And on that point, the link with TIQ, who actually do a really great job, they were able to offer that government seal of approval that I think for a lot of markets is incredibly valuable. And so while there's some cash, and that's always great, and it can help to financially de-risk, it really is the connections and really that seal of approval that your local government thinks you're good enough to be here and somebody has vouched for you. And so we ended up hosting a signing ceremony in Taiwan with our new partner, with TIQ there, with Austrade there, with everyone there, and it really added some gravitas to the whole thing. So I can certainly vouch for that as being something that people should definitely understand. There's a lot of help out there, and you simply need to go through the process. It's very logical. They're real people at the other end. It's Anna and Michael and Tim, Joseph, Jeremy. They're real people who are paid to help you, which is a pretty incredible opportunity we have.
I am just going to ask you about that experience too, because often people sort of think that getting involved with government can be arduous and too much due diligence and, not quite worth the effort. But as you're saying, these are people who are pretty much in that go-getting space. They understand what startups, what entrepreneurial people want and need, and work their damnedest to make it happen.
Yeah, they really do. And I think the most important thing is their milestones, their KPIs, the things that drive them, are creating successful stories to be able to promote and celebrate. And they are a really great resource, whether that's local government, state government, national government. And to Claire's point, we've had Lord Mayor's office from London try and poach us. We've had people from Singapore try and poach us. Come here, set up, we'll look after you in this way and this way. We did that with China a few years ago and had some grants that were on the go. There's a lot of these opportunities. If you can find a way to get on their radar, then people want to celebrate success in their area. So it's in their interest to be looking after you so that they can celebrate you.
Yeah, what politician doesn't want to stand next to a successful business person? Mate, I do want to go about the time. How do you choose where to go? for example, and Claire, this is for you as well, because your expertise is around Singapore. Should you expand your business to Singapore because you really like the warm weather? Should I be considering Fiji because I like sandy beaches?
Yeah.
How do you pick the markets that you want to go to as the right ones?
So I think that every startup is created to solve a problem. Okay, that's kind of the definition of startups. They're trying to solve a problem, and you want to look for other markets that are experiencing that same problem. I had a really great example actually of what reason not to go. So I just heard it last week. There's a startup that does theft prevention in retail stores. Often when people are thinking about where to go, they think bigger is better. Where's the big market? And this theft prevention company in retail stores was looking at Japan. There's a lot of people in Japan. There's a lot of stores in Japan. Great, robust retail environment. And so they said, yep, great, we're going to go to Japan. Huge market for us preventing theft in Japan. They had the stats around the number of people and the number of stores. And I said to them,
I know what's missing in this equation.
there isn't actually any theft in Japan. I'm not sure if you've looked at the crime statistics of the market. So that problem that they're solving here in Australia isn't a problem that exists in Japan. And that's why it's really important when thinking about where to go is testing the assumptions you may have about other markets, because some of those assumptions can be quite risky, particularly if you're just looking from a desktop research perspective. So I would say, the best way to have a look is what's happening from a macroeconomic perspective in those markets. Where can you see similar cultural, in business if you're a B2B, or in commercial if you're in consumer side of things, and just have a look around the world and probably go. And a lot of these programs I know with TIQ, they've got great familiarization programs where they can teach you about the market, and sometimes there's market missions that are offered where you're able to go and check out that market and see if it's right for you, because you really do need to touch and feel the market before you know that it's right for you to go there.
James, hearing issues are a global problem, but what else was on your checklist that you were ticking off as you looked about where to go?
Well, it's one of those things, to Claire's point, what's the missing link? So we provide solutions for people with hearing challenges. We have B2B strength audiology, but if you were looking at where is the worst hearing loss, those markets are in fact the least serviced by our business partners who are audiology clinics. And it's because of that that the hearing loss statistics improve. So if we were out there grassroots trying to deal with people who have a hearing loss, we would be going after India, China, and Africa. And so those markets, while enormous, don't actually have an incredibly strong audiology footprint. Same with many regions in Southeast Asia. And so for us, as a B2B focused business, what we needed was strength and control in that audiology space for them to be pulling us in. So there's 5 players that rule our universe, and we've gone international with 3 of them because we can't put product in their stores. They don't have stores there. So that was the real focus for us. Where on the list makes sense? And then where do we think we're going to be able to drive the most value?
Okay, so following on from that, because we've just touched on it, what are the risky assumptions that businesses make about international markets, and how do you validate them quickly? James, would you like to continue?
Yeah, the big one for us is speed. As a startup, we always think next Monday, and then our big B2B partners think next year or year after. And so if it works here and I can get from dominating Queensland to then New South Wales to then, wow, we got that international rollout. And that took us 18 months with a big international player here. But now that we're at international level, surely we just plug into the next national level when we go internationally. But they want to run you through the same circuit that Australia ran you through. So they want to start with 10, not 10,000. And they want to build, they want to learn, they want to see how they incorporate your tech into their platform. So the big one for us was horse before cart, because getting in and getting that first yes of we like your product, it solves a problem. The next yes is, are we willing to pay for it and will we get it on our shelves? And then that third yes of actually buying a whole bunch of them and getting them going is going to fit into their strategic portfolio and not yours. And that's certainly where we've overstretched ourselves historically, is seeing what a great opportunity, let's go after it, putting some resource there. And then 12 months later, you get what you were looking for. And it's a long 12 months.
Claire, your take, and I think I was supposed to also pick up on the point that James is sort of saying there. Do you swallow the ocean in one gulp, or is it sort of that teaspoon exercise of one by one?
Absolutely, teaspoon exercise of one by one. Yeah, you don't want to, I call it boiling the ocean at all. I think you need to think about where's best for you and go slow to go fast, and spend some time planning and testing your risky assumptions, either by visiting the markets or speaking to customers. So when you're back at the beginning of your startup and you're doing product market fit, you're trying to speak to as many customers as possible. And you want to do a similar thing when you're first entering a market to test those assumptions. And the more time you do invest up front, learning about the market, the quicker it is to launch. And I think as well, you need to think, the biggest mistake I see with Aussie business is trying to copy and paste. So copy and paste business model, copy and paste value proposition, copy and paste how you service your customers over there. Often it needs to be different, and you need to reevaluate the way your business works. So you may do direct selling if you're B2B here, but you might need to work through partners in a new market. And also thinking about managing your team and people and keeping your business culture in a new market. Often people assume that that's a lot easier than it actually is in reality.
I want to ask you this, given that we're all looking at global data around economies at the moment, and it has been tough of late. Are there geographies that are hot right now, and are there some that are quite tough?
Yeah, so I think it's a sentiment thing, and I travel quite a lot as part of my role, and I think I spent some time in the UK, and there's lots of opportunities in the UK at the moment. But the sentiment from a perspective there is one of caution at the moment, whereas I was just in Asia last week, and the sentiment there is very strong. Let's innovate, let's grow. It's a really positive environment in Southeast Asia, and they're really open to looking at new technologies and dealing with Australian businesses. Australia has a great reputation in Asia, particularly in markets like Singapore, Japan, Korea. And so I think that those markets are really hot right now. I know a lot of Australian businesses look to the US, and the US is a really big opportunity. But I would also question, is that the first place you go? Because Australia to the US it's a massive market. It's a huge thing to try and take on as your initial international market. So I'd sort of vote for Southeast Asia at the moment.
And if you look at India today, who are totally pumped, like they've won their own World Cup by putting a module on the moon, an amazing achievement on their part. Congrats to everyone involved in that. James, do you have a perception of that as you look around in terms of markets coming off the boil or on? And do you think that way as you look to expand?
We do now, absolutely. And I think we also need to take into consideration the factors that make our business model really successful here. Like we talked about, there's a lot of support. We don't make a medical device, but Australia has incredible allied health support and allied health funding. So government support is a huge part of what we do in Australia, and that is different in each market that we're going to be going into. So understanding those reimbursement protocols, reimbursement models is essential. And there's also just some cut and dry of access to scale. So for example, India in the hearing aid market, their average hearing aid sale is around 400 USD. Whereas in Australia, it's closer to 5,000. So while we are a great cost appropriate addition to sales in Australia, we are market competitive with the hearing aids that our partners are trying to sell to people. And so then we create competitive tension at that price point. So we would need to be adjusting our model, adjusting our product, and adjusting our offering for a market like India to make sense, despite the focus on the new tech and the energy that's coming out of that space. I would echo Claire's sentiment that Southeast Asia is on the go. I mean, we just launched in Singapore with our first clinic partners, and they're thinking Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, what's next? How do we go? How do we take advantage of this opportunity? And I think a lot of the other markets that took a really strong run in COVID, as rates go up, everyone's taken a breath. So there's enough cash, but that really aggressive growth mindset has certainly petered back a little bit. So I would echo the sentiment that there's much more aggressive go forward in Southeast Asia from what I've seen.
Well, following on from that, and we've touched on it before, but TIQ's Go Global Export Program, you specifically did it, but it has a specific market in mind and the challenges that you're addressing. Tell us about your experience and how it helped.
Yeah, so we used the TIQ Go Global for access into Hungary, and that was very much a pull. We had a former head of one of the big 5 audiology companies who'd relocated back to Hungary for personal reasons during COVID and said, hey, I really liked what I was doing with you in Australia. I think I can help you do it here. And through those networks, through that access, through our international partnerships, but we had to establish an entity, we had to get our trade protocols, we need to get our warehousing, we need to get all of our legals done, our compliance documents, all of those things that we needed some help. We needed GDPR consultants, we needed accountants set up for appropriate reporting. We're an ASX listed entity, so now we wholly own a subsidiary and that has become part of our reporting protocols. So there are a number of hoops that needed to be jumped through, and you can certainly look at it and say, hey, that guy wants to buy my stuff, great, I'll ship it. But when you're taking a breath and looking at, all right, instead of selling some stuff to a different place, I'm launching into a new market, having that TIQ support, Anna was running it for us here, you can call and they put you in touch with Germany. And Istvan Nagy is our man on the ground in Hungary. And he's been talking to the TIQ reps in Germany about what the German market looks like and how he should be thinking about a European expansion. So that local access is really important. And it also raises a collection of questions and helps you tick a lot of those boxes that might be a surprise when you're launching into a new space.
I do want to thank you, actually, reminding me that Audira is an ASX listed company. It's reporting season right now. I know how hectic that can be for everyone involved. So great to have you on the show today, and your time is greatly appreciated. Thanks to everyone who's watching today. You're watching Startup Daily's How to Startup Masterclass series. Today we're talking Grabbing Global Success with Claire Bull from Rainmaking APAC and Dr. James Fielding from Brisbane-based Audira Limited. Well, let's get into the next section. Don't forget that you can also ask questions. Put them into the chat box there. We'll put them to our panel to answer. Well, the question now is, how do you do it? We're going offshore. We're going to put boots on the ground. Do we not put boots on the ground? Do we fly in, fly out with our business? Tell us, Claire. There's a whole bunch of different models, different ways of thinking about it. I've seen founders relocate offshore. Another great Queensland company, Paper Plane, run by Simone Joyce. She's currently moving her entire family to New York as they look to roll out in that market. Big decisions you make along the way. Give us an idea of ways to tackle it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as James said earlier, there's a different way, and different businesses, different things are going to work. One of the models I think initially sometimes people use to look at the market is the fly-in, fly-out model, where they go in and visit. But at some point, you need to make a commitment to the market, and particularly, say, for example, if we're talking about Southeast Asia, it is seen as essential to kind of have an office and have a presence in the market. And then if we're talking about the US or the UK, it's just not physically possible for a founder to do a fly-in, fly-out more than a couple of times. When you think about putting boots on the ground, that is about having a presence in the market, but it's also about growing the culture of your business in a new market. So I'm sure for James, when he's thinking about expanding his businesses into new markets, he's built a culture and he needs people that he trusts and knows will continue that culture as his business grows into new markets. And that's one of the main reasons why you often see founders or an initial exec that's been a first hire or second hire in Australia that is the one that moves overseas. And that's a very common thing, and it's actually a really important thing to help translate your culture into the new market, as well as just know that there's someone that you trust. So an example of that over the UK is actually someone who lives in the UK, does their entire workday without being able to speak to you as the CEO because you're asleep while they're working all day. So having boots on the ground that you can trust in the new market is really important. Another way that people often enter new markets, which is what James has done, is through partners. This is essential in markets that have huge language barriers and huge business cultural barriers. So places like Japan and Korea, I almost always see businesses enter at least initially through a partner that can help them to enter the new market and make connections and build their network. It doesn't mean because you enter one way that you need to continue on that way. It might just be the best way for you to kind of go into the market initially. So same thing, it's horses for courses. It's not always going to be the same way for everyone, but in different businesses, things can work really well, and there's no reason why you kind of can't test that out. And I know James has got a story that we spoke about when we were preparing for this masterclass about entering China with partners that I'm sure he'd love to share with us that can illustrate how it doesn't always work.
Oh, I do want to hear this story, James. But tell us, what you do is there the Dr. Fielding Royal Tour of the globe?
There is actually every now and again. And before we launched in the US, before we put boots on the ground, I actually relocated the family for 3 months. It was going to be 6. We ended up coming home for family reasons, but being over there, showing face, and then having our first hires, attending trade shows with them, using their networks, but then being there as the founder also adds a little bit of energy to the room. People go, oh, you're taking this very seriously. You're here in person, and that's great. I ended up doing the World Blitz to Singapore, Milan, Budapest, Zurich, home in 4 days, and we'll probably be repeating that. But, you know, just sort of, we go and show face and get there, but at first point, you have to have people you can trust. And I think the language barrier is a real reason, but culturally, if somebody's flying your flag, you need to know that they're going to be doing that well. And, you know, there's certainly some trial and error, but we do think we have a strong culture here. And a lot of the decision making that we do around choosing those markets is, have we found someone with enough industry access to genuinely open the door? Because getting on the shelf is easy, it's getting off the shelf hard. And so you have to be in there and genuinely creating change if you're offering good solutions. So someone who has no idea about the industry is not going to be able to grease the wheels and get things where they need to be.
And in that context, in terms of that rollout, is it a case of, you know, you're able to work with government bodies and maybe have a desk in there? Or, you know, when do you get to that point where you put the shingle up and people can see your presence in a market and there are people going into an office every day? You know, the last couple of years, of course, have been crazy and we've all got our heads around sort of being able to work remotely. But that physical presence thing does sort of say that you're committed to a region.
Yeah, and for us, we ended up using an industry-based recruiter who sat as our employer of record for a while in the US. And then we transitioned across to contracts of our own, having set up our own entity in the US. When it came to Europe, we went straight for, let's set up the entity and choose the space. And we trusted Ishvan. He chose a great space in a co-working. And that was all we needed. You know, we needed that presence there to be setting the scene. And as we said, horse before cart. So we have enough of a presence there to tick boxes and move momentum. But when the full country launches occur, then we'll be looking at what additional resource is necessary in support of those opportunities.
All right. Hello to Gina, who's watching today, and Sally from Fetchy. We've got some questions from them we'll be coming to in just a moment. If you've got a question, do put it into the chat box and we'll put it to our great panel. James, I do want to dig down a little bit more into that partner notion. Tell us a little bit about how you build that, because this is going to be crucial to your success. It can make or break. And I would imagine probably somewhere along the way there probably is the story of we backed the wrong horse on those partnerships. We've all had those moments. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
So in 2015, I left full-time medicine to focus on the company. 2016, we did all the R&D. 2017, Kickstarter. 2018, shipped to 60 countries and great. 2018, went after every shiny light we could find. We were in full throttle, just grab it by the throat and let's see what happens. And then we had the opportunity to go and slay the dragon, go north, capture China. Look at how many people are in China, And so we had a really well thought out plan. We had partners, we had it all, but we anchored a lot of our activities off a single influencer who, up to that point, had been incredibly effective. And then when 11/11 came around and it was time to launch, we made $250,000. We made decent sales, but based on the energy and effort and the resource that we had in place, when that key partnership we had didn't mobilize, it ended up crumbling the whole thing. And it was a real dogfight from that point on for the next few months to really unwind essentially a false started launch for us. And it was at that point that I actually shredded the empire. I got rid of all the PR, all the marketing, all the international stuff, and said, if you don't sit next to me in Brisbane, you're no longer on the team. And I sold out of one of my other businesses to fund up Audira and keep it going, and got that match for some high net worth funding out of New York. And we just said, grow the number of clinics, grow the amount of revenue per clinic. A nice, simple business model with a list of target clients on the board, ticking them off one at a time, no more shiny lights, laser focus. Apparently, if you focus, you get better result. And that certainly worked out for us. We learned our lesson. We went too hard, too fast. We put a lot of faith into some partnerships, and for a number of reasons, they didn't work out, and we had to adjust and adapt to keep the dream alive.
Wow, James has got some stories there, Claire, and some lessons, I think, for everyone along the way, and reminders of the fundamentals of business that you want to come back to every time. Should you work with partners, and how do you find the right ones?
Yeah, so actually, interestingly, that's something that government can help you with. So as James mentioned, TIQ, for example, will have people in offices around the world, and they're really tapped into the market. And as he also mentioned earlier, they're KPI'd for your success. So if you're an Aussie startup, you can go and as your first point of call, speak to the government representatives in the market you're targeting and talk to them. Often they will have a list of preferred partners that will help you enter the market. So there's sort of market entry partners, and then there will be sector or industry specific partners that you can work with, as well as often there's recruitment companies that might have offices in Australia and then also have offices in other markets, and that's a great way to start to help to look for recommendations for different partners. There are a lot of partners out there. There's a lot of operators in all of the markets, and I think doing your due diligence and spending quite a bit of time with those people, understanding their case studies of who they've worked with before and what successes they've actually had, and do they understand your business intimately and what you're trying to do and the problem you're solving. It is something that's really important. It's not always the way working with partners. If you are, like the example you said before, able to move yourself and your family into a new market, and you really feel strongly about having a direct sales model because that's worked for you in other places, that absolutely can be right for you. And I've seen that work incredibly well as well. So you don't have to work with partners, except maybe in those markets I mentioned where there's huge language barriers. I guess probably the biggest thing that you're going to partner with someone for is network and connections. So if you think about when you're moving house to a new country, you need so much when you move house and move your family. You need a new pet shop, you need a new doctor, you need a new library that you're going to, absolutely everything more than you could think of. It's the same when you're moving a business into a new market. You need a new law firm, a new accounting provider. You need to understand the regulatory framework in that business. So you do need people in that market to help you, and finding those right people, I'd start with looking at governments and market entry partners, because they will have a list of suppliers that they regularly use and they know and trust in those markets.
Tell me, is it a little bit like when you step out onto the pavement from an international airport, you have all of these partners suddenly coming up to you wanting to help, a little bit like taxi drivers?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, depends what market you're looking at, but that is actually something I've seen people struggle with is I've announced my expansion into the UK and suddenly my LinkedIn inbox is filled with, oh, this lead generation company and this recruitment company. Sometimes it can be, how do I choose who the right people are to work with me? And that's another reason why it's really important to go and visit those markets and sit down and get to know those people, so you know who you feel comfortable with, because in some markets like the US and UK, they're literally going to be running the business for you while you're asleep. So you need to be able to trust them with your business and your value that you're bringing to the market.
James, to keep the driver metaphor going, is it a little bit like having TIQ saying, here are all the 5-star partners, rather than sort of just being taken the long way round at twice the price?
Yeah, essentially, they have enough experience, or perhaps more importantly, because you can't expect one person to be across every part of the industry, they have an established network to be able to fact check any of the claims or the representations or the history of partners that you're going to be working with. And it certainly is a very valuable exercise to be building that out. I would also say if you have any informal networks, they've always been the most effective for me in my personal experience and for our business. People that you know through industry who've worked with particular people already, especially if you're being pulled, then that end customer, that end destination, there should already be enough groundwork there for you to ask the right questions and start looking around and really testing people that are going to help you execute on that.
All right, we're going to go to questions in just a moment, but I do want to, in this initial phase, just put this one to you. We've touched on it a little bit earlier. The value proposition, how much does it need to change from market to market? If it works here in Australia, surely it works everywhere around the world, because we're the best place in the world.
Yeah, so this is actually how I got into this industry. Is I've got a B2B marketing background, and I was engaged by a market entry firm helping businesses with their value proposition in new markets. And the answer is sometimes it has to change quite a lot. So often, even if you are solving a problem, you might be solving a different problem. So I can give you an example of that. I was working with a large logistics and supply chain robotics company who was supplying robotics into warehouses. In the US, their value proposition to their US customer base was, we will take people out of your factories, we'll get rid of those overheads and wage costs in your factories. And that's exactly what the robots did for those companies in the US. They came into some businesses in Southeast Asia with that value proposition, and in some Southeast Asian countries where they have warehouses, the wage costs are actually incredibly low, and that's not the problem for them. The problem for them might be space. And what this robotics company actually did is they meant that the distance between aisles was shorter, the aisles could go higher, the picking and packing was a lot easier in a refined space. And so that company was solving a problem for the market in Southeast Asia, but the way that they communicated the value and the problem they were actually solving was different. And so absolutely you need to think really clearly about what your value proposition is and what the problem you're solving is, because you just might need to talk about your business a little bit differently. And also, if you've got a large set of products or services that you offer, maybe you enter that market with a value proposition that's 1 or 2 products or services initially, and you expand that out organically as you grow your presence in the market. Because you've got to remember, if you're in Australia and you're selling all things to all people and you're fantastic, you're entering the market as a new brand. It's great to be really refined and have a 1-sentence way to talk about your business and what it is that you provide for those customers in the new market. And it can be quite overwhelming if you just try to do everything and all your services straight away in that market you're going into.
James, you've touched on a little bit earlier. Is there anything you want to add to what Claire has just said?
No, I think she summed it up very well. I think the value proposition for us as a B2B business predominantly, the end user value proposition is fairly similar, but the B2B side of it and the value we bring to each business in each market is quite different. And it's understanding that and being able to communicate that. For example, the nice simple one is the government reimbursement. In Australia, there are almost 1 million people who can get our product for 0 out-of-pocket expense. those types of funding models don't apply in other regions. So in an Australian clinic, you might say, hey, have you been servicing your Department of Veterans Affairs clients as effectively as you could be? Let's help you solve that. Let's reach out to that network. Great. What a great revenue add for that clinic. And then what a great value add for that veteran. In other areas, there aren't funding models for those types of things. So you're looking at more as this will help you sell higher ASP per client if you can only afford entry-level hearing aids. You offer the headphones as well as a value add. Now your clinic is making more ads. So there's a number of different ways of really positioning that are essential if you're actually going to pull it off.
All right, well, let's get to our questions from our viewers. And James, I'm going to throw you the first curly one.
Sure.
What's the most unexpected challenge you deal with when entering a new market? We're talking about cultural issues. We're talking about government and regulations. What's your feeling on that front?
I think we do an awful lot of homework before we go in. So I could say the most disappointing challenge we face is how long things take, but I'm not sure they're necessarily unexpected, but they certainly are disappointing and frustrating. I think there's a sense that if it's good enough for Australia, it's good enough for anywhere. And to your point, Simon, we're the best country in the world. So why doesn't everyone like our stuff immediately? Why isn't Australia the greatest seal of approval? And what you find is in most international countries, they like the idea of Australia, but it's not going to be your ticket in. You have to kind of start from the ground up and prove yourself again.
But as you mentioned, having that government seal of approval along the way certainly helps open some of those doors. Sally from Fetchy, which of course is the personal smart shopping app that helps people save on purchases. She's asked if you guys have any advice on strategy to acquire more users because their marketing strategies now mainly target Australian audiences. Should Fetchy tailor their approach to target those international markets more, or should they keep trying to pursue an Australian market to find an effective way to make the app more visible here? Sounds like you should have also a look at Kayla Medika's piece. She's a marketing expert we had on our first How to Start Up program, Sal, but I'll start with you, Claire. What would your advice be?
Yeah, so back to what I was talking about in value proposition. I'm not exactly across what her app does, but I do think she would need to look into a new market and maybe do some experiments and see what works for how she communicates. So, for example, if she's looking at Singapore, do a little bit of ABC testing with some messaging and see what resonates with the market there. As I think I was saying earlier, it's not always a great idea to copy paste what you're doing in Australia. There could be an opportunity there, and it's great if she's got an ability to experiment and test with a few different types of messaging to see how she can gain users there. Sometimes, particularly in some Southeast Asian markets, actually communication channels are really different. So, for example, you've got Line in Thailand, you've got WeChat in China, which is a huge e-commerce platform, and then actually WhatsApp in places like Singapore and across Southeast Asia is a common way for sales and communications to be done. So also thinking about what new channels are there in the markets that you're looking at that you may not currently be aware of and that we don't use regularly in Australia would probably be my first piece of advice in that case.
James, anything to add on that front for Sally?
I would just say, Sally, that it certainly helps if you've got a win. You know, I think when people want to look at the value proposition, if you can say that you really figured it out on home soil first, it adds an awful lot of credibility before you're looking offshore. So if you're wondering whether you need to be pushing harder into Australia, I would certainly recommend making sure you feel really strong about Australian operations so you got a nice bedrock before you start looking at that expansion.
Yeah, and I can probably add one to that. I've got an analogy I use around people who have a baby to save their marriage. Now, I'm not saying this is the case here, but some people are like, oh, I'm not sure about my business in Australia. Maybe I'll go and see if I can do something bigger and better overseas. In most cases, I'd say don't do that. Just as James said, you want to get the runs on the board and have your wins and case studies and feel really comfortable and confident about where your operations are in Australia and how your business is in Australia before you enter into a new market. It's not something you do to kind of save the business, oh, this isn't working here, I'll go over there. And, I'm sure this isn't the case with the person answering the question, but I think it's an important thing to remember is really solidify your growth in Australia and feel confident about what you're doing and then be ready to enter a new market.
You've also got to think about that 20 years worth of cash flow if you do have that baby. Gina is selling her products online and makes most of her sales through Etsy, mostly in the US and Canada. But she's finding it hard to get her website noticed and has started to use Google Ads. What else can she do to grow her customer base that doesn't cost an arm and a leg?
Another marketing question.
Yep. I think it's always, you build your product and then you've got to find your markets. That's the challenge.
And so I would spend a bit of time. I would actually make the trip over to the US and Canada, spend a bit of time with a few of my customers and say, how did you find out about me? Where are you looking? I mean, I'm guessing, but maybe in the US there's a huge Pinterest following. Is there some kind of tie-up she could do with Pinterest in the market? Or are these people getting information about the products she's selling from their local schools or churches? Is there certain regions in the US or Canada that she's drawn in? Could she find out why? So I think that's one of the things of really understanding your customer and your market. And, there must be a reason why she's getting a lot of sales from US and Canada. If she can uncover the reason why those people are interested, she could go and meet them and find out where else they're looking. And so where else she could put her messages to draw them in.
James, I want to ask you this one because I think it's a really interesting question around some broader fundamentals. And that's, how do you identify the right stakeholders to get what you're trying to do with your business? Founders are often at the cutting edge. They're creating a new product that solves a problem in a way that's never been done before. So that story and getting skeptics across the line is always going to be a big challenge to convince them to believe in what you're doing the same way you do. How do you approach a challenge like that?
I think it has to be effective storytelling. It has to be making it really clear what the value is once you've solved the problem. I think if you rely on the technology, you've almost certainly missed the boat. There will be very few people around who can genuinely understand on a technical level what it is you've done, but most people will be able to understand it at a human being level. So you have to keep the narrative really simple. We joke about it. We say, sell a headphone, save a marriage. And the big pinch point for our product is using it as TV headphones for people that are hard of hearing, crank the TV up to 100 and it drives their partner nuts. That's the problem we solve in a big way. And so most people can say, oh yeah, my uncle's like that, my cousin's like that. Oh yeah, my brother should be wearing earplugs on site, but he doesn't, he's deaf as. And then it creates all these little bits and pieces of going, I see why that problem matters. And I think as long as you don't go too technical, you're going to be able to bring people over the line if it is a problem genuinely worth solving.
Just finally, because I do want to finish on an up note, of course, the moment everyone is looking around the world, wondering about the economic challenges, there's talk of recessions in various markets. Is now the right time? Should you be stepping up as a founder and taking a swing amid all of this economic uncertainty, Claire?
I would say absolutely yes, particularly as we spoke about in Southeast Asia, but also it's a great time to get yourself ready. I think I mentioned earlier, go slow to go fast. The more planning and validation you can do at a time like this is fantastic. I would absolutely say it's a great time to go international, and the government support is there. So recession or no recession, you can tap into that government support. So like example, what TIQ is doing with Austrade, with governments in other countries, it's a great time to start looking and exploring whether it will work for your business.
James, we know from experience that some of the great tech companies have been built in periods of economic difficulty. Is your view that now's another one of those opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at shifting different regions and putting our energy into different areas. And we certainly circled the wagons a little bit, but it was that go so to grow that Claire's been talking about. So we took our breath, we realigned our resources, but we're not slowing down. We're just being a bit more refined. in which markets we choose.
Well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for Claire Ball from Rainmaking APAC and Dr. James Fielding from Ordira for sharing your insights today. You can connect with them on LinkedIn if you want to know more. I know that Claire will get back to you in a moment. She's got a good LinkedIn game going there. Look, a big thank you to Trade and Investment Queensland for supporting today's masterclass. Don't forget, if you are a Queensland business, apply now for the TIQ Go Export program, which gives export-ready businesses support and match funding of up to $25,000. Go to the link in the chat box for more. Make sure you're signed up to the startupdaily.net newsletter to find out more about our next masterclass. Of course, Dr. James Fielding, I'm sure, will also help if you've got any questions about that TIQ program. I'm Simon Thompson. Thanks so much for joining us on How to Start Up. See you again next month. Bye for now.